Long before the high-frequency traders of Wall Street, the American Mafia discovered that the true formula for fortune wasn't luck, but the speed of a telegraph wire. Welcome back. Today, we are going to tell a story that sits at the strange, smoky intersection of two worlds that, on the surface, have absolutely nothing to do with each other. On one side, you have the grimy, violent, cigar-chomping world of the American Mafia in the 1920s and 30s, guys with names like Bugsy and Moe, running numbers and dodging tax evasion charges. On the other side, you have the sterile, quiet, chalk-dust atmosphere of MIT and Bell Labs, inhabited by introverted geniuses who juggle on unicycles and think in pure mathematics. You might ask, what is the thread that ties a mob boss like Al Capone or Moe Annenberg to a scientist like Claude Shannon, the father of the digital age? The answer is the edge. The answer is information. We are diving deep into the opening chapters of William Poundstone's masterpiece, Fortune's Formula. And the premise we need to start with is this: information is a commodity. Today, we understand this intuitively. We live in the age of fiber optics, high-frequency trading, and the Internet. We know that if you get the news a millisecond before the other guy, you make $1 billion. But what we're going to look at today is the genesis of that idea. We are going to look at how the concept of information velocity, the speed at which a fact travels from point A to point B, created the modern world, and how it was funded, initially, by organized crime. Let's go back. Way back. Early 1900s. Cincinnati. Imagine a man named John Payne. He's a telegraph operator for Western Union. Now, in the early 20th century, Western Union is the Internet. It is the backbone of communication. But they have a policy: they won't transmit horse racing results because they don't want to be associated with gambling. It's a morality issue. John Payne looks at this situation, and he sees an opportunity. He sees an arbitrage. He realizes that a horse race happens in real time, but the result travels slowly. There is a gap. A time gap. If the horse crosses the finish line at 2 p.m., the bookmakers in the city might not know the winner until 2:05 p.m. In those 5 minutes, a pass poster, a cheater who already knows the result, can place a bet on the winning horse. The bookie takes the bet because he thinks the race is still running. So Payne quits his job. He creates the first racing wire. And the technology he uses is laughably primitive but brilliantly effective. He hires a guy to stand at the racetrack. When the winning horse crosses the line, this employee doesn't run to a phone. He uses a hand mirror. He flashes a code in the sunlight to another guy standing in a skyscraper window overlooking the track. That guy decodes the flash and instantly telegraphs the result to Payne's network of pool rooms. Think about the physics of that. Speed of light. Mirror to eye. Then telegraph. Payne's network got the results to the bookie seconds before the official channels. Why does this matter? Because Payne wasn't selling gambling. He was selling insurance. He went to the bookies and said, "If you pay me, I will tell you who won instantly, so you can reject the bets from the cheaters." He was selling speed. He was selling the edge. This little Cincinnati hustle didn't stay small. It metastasized. It grew into a national infrastructure. And like all things that generate massive piles of untraceable cash, it attracted the sharks. Enter Montenis. Enter the General News Bureau. And eventually, enter the heavyweight champion of information monopolies, Moe Annenberg. Now, Annenberg is a fascinating character. He wasn't just a thug, he was a businessman who understood vertical integration before they taught it in business school. He bought the daily racing form, the Bible, of horse racing data. Then he took over the wire services. He ruthlessly crushed the competition. There is a story in the book that perfectly illustrates the power of information warfare. Annenberg had a rival named Irving Wexler. Wexler was trying to set up his own wire service, stealing Annenberg's clients. So, what did Annenberg do? He didn't just send guys with baseball bats, though he probably did that too. He used the network. Annenberg knew Wexler was tapping into his phone lines to steal the race results. So, Annenberg staged a sting. He waited for a specific race. When the winner crossed the line, Annenberg's men sent the correct result to his own loyal bookies instantly. But on the lines that he knew Wexler was listening to, he delayed the result. He held it back. Wexler's bookies are sitting there, thinking the race is still running. Meanwhile, Annenberg's men, who already know the winner, run into Wexler's betting parlors and place massive bets on the horse that has already won. A few minutes later, the result comes through to Wexler. He realizes he's been cleaned out. He has to pay out on bets he never should have taken. It bankrupted the rival syndicate in a single afternoon. That is the power of the time gap. That is information as a weapon. But here is the detail that really blows your mind. You have to ask yourself, how did these mobsters build a national telecommunications network in the 1930s? They didn't build the poles and string the wires themselves. They leased them. From AT&T. This is the silent partner aspect of the story. By the mid-1930s, Moe Annenberg was AT&T's fifth largest customer. Think about that. The American Telephone and Telegraph Company, the bluest of the blue-chip stocks, the most respectable corporation in America, was making a fortune leasing lines to the mob. The lawyers at AT&T knew it. They weren't stupid. They wrote morality clauses into the contracts saying, "You can't use these lines for illegal acts." But did they enforce them? Of course not. Not until the government put a gun to their head. It's a tale as old as time, corporate greed providing the infrastructure for illicit profit. It's the 1930s version of banks laundering cartel money. The infrastructure of the underworld ran on the hardware of the overworld. So, we have this massive machine. The wire. It's generating millions of dollars. It's the lifeblood of organized crime. If you cut the wire, the bookies go blind, the betting stops, and the mob starves. This brings us to the inevitable conflict. The government wakes up. We enter the era of the Kefauver Committee in the early 1950s. Senator Estes Kefauver. He decides to drag these guys into the light. He labels the Continental Press, the successor to Annenberg's empire, as public enemy number one. This is the moment where the old world starts to crack. And nothing symbolizes this better than the testimony of Frank Costello. Costello was the prime minister of the mob. He was smart, polished, and terrifying. When he was called to testify on television, and this was one of the first major televised political events, he refused to show his face. So, the cameramen did something artistic. They focused the camera on his hands. For hours, America watched Frank Costello's hands. They fidgeted. They danced. They tore up pieces of paper. They poured water. It was a ballet of nervousness. It showed the public that these untouchable gods of the underworld were human, and they were scared. When they asked Costello, "What can we do to stop gambling?" he gave an answer that was pure, cynical logic. He said, "Burn the stables and shoot the horses." In other words, as long as the event exists, people will bet on it. As long as people bet on it, someone will sell the information. But the mob had a problem. They had a loose cannon. A man named Willie Moretti. Moretti is a tragic, almost Shakespearean figure in this saga. He was a high-ranking mobster, but he was suffering from advanced syphilis. The disease was eating his brain. He became erratic. He loved the spotlight. He was the guy who allegedly put a gun in Tommy Dorsey's mouth to get Frank Sinatra out of a contract, the real-life inspiration for The Godfather. Scene. But during the hearings, Moretti talked too much. He was joking with the senators. He was charming the cameras. And the other bosses, Vito Genovese and that combination, they looked at this and said, "This guy is a liability. His brain is rotting, and he's going to spill the secrets. So, in 1951, Willie Moretti goes to Joe's Elbow Room in New Jersey for lunch. He orders a meal, and 4 men walk in and shoot him dead. It was a mercy killing, in a twisted way. But it marked the end of an era. The Wire was being dismantled by the law. The old guard was dying out. The brute force method of controlling information, bombing your rivals and bribing the cops, was becoming obsolete. And right as the door closes on the violent, analog world of the mob, a new door opens. A door that leads to a laboratory in New Jersey. This is where the book makes a brilliant pivot. We leave the smoke-filled rooms and we enter the mind of the most important man you've likely never heard of, Claude Shannon. If you are listening to this podcast right now, you owe your life to Claude Shannon. Every email, every JPEG, every streaming video, every bit of data stored on every hard drive in the world is based on the mathematics he invented. Who was he? He was a Midwestern boy, born in Michigan. A tinkerer. A genius. People compared him to Einstein, but while Einstein gave us the theory of the universe, Shannon gave us the theory of the digital universe. The book introduces us to Shannon in the 1950s, right as the mob is crumbling. He's at Bell Labs, the same Bell Labs owned by AT&T, the company that wired the mob. The connections are everywhere. Shannon is different. He's not a stuffy academic. He's a guy who rides a unicycle down the hallways of the world's most prestigious laboratory while juggling 3 balls. He builds chess-playing machines. He builds a mechanical mouse that can solve a maze. He's playful. He treats science like a toy box. But underneath the eccentricity was a mind that could see the invisible architecture of reality. In 1937, at age 21, Shannon wrote a master's thesis at MIT. It has been called the most important master's thesis of the 20th century. Here is what he figured out. He looked at Boolean logic. This was a system of philosophy from the 1800s developed by George Boole. It dealt with statements that are either true or false. No maybes. Just true or false. Shannon looked at electrical circuits, switches. A switch is either on or off. And he had the epiphany that changed history. He realized that the on-off of a switch is the exact same thing as the true/false of logic. This means you can build a machine that makes logical decisions. If switch A is on and switch B is on, then light C turns on. That is a thought process. That is, if/then, logic. Before Shannon, circuits were just about power, sending electricity to a light bulb. After Shannon, circuits were about information. He turned the physical into the logical. But he didn't stop there. In 1948 he published A Mathematical Theory of Communication. This is the Magna Carta of the information age. In this paper, he coined a word we use every day. The bit, short for binary digit. Shannon proved that all information, a Shakespeare sonnet, a picture of your dog, a telephone conversation, the genetic code in your DNA, can be broken down into a string of yes/no choices. Ones and zeros. He quantified information. He turned it into a measurable physical quantity, just like mass or energy. Why does this matter to our story about gambling? Because Shannon was obsessed with the idea of noise versus signal. He worked on cryptography during World War II. He built the system, Sigsaly, that allowed Churchill and Roosevelt to talk securely over the ocean. He proved that for a code to be truly unbreakable, the key has to be totally random. Shannon understood that the world is a chaotic place full of static. But if you have the right math, if you have the right formula, you can filter out the noise and find the signal. You can find the truth. And what is gambling? What is the stock market? It is a noisy system. It is a chaotic mess of prices and odds and rumors. The formula, that the book's title refers to, *Fortune's Formula*, is about using Shannon's insights to find the signal in the noise of the market. So, we have these two timelines crashing together. Timeline A, the mob. They tried to control the signal, by owning the wire, by bribing the cops, by shooting the competition. They wanted a monopoly on the speed of information. But they failed. The government crushed them. The technology outpaced them. Timeline B, Claude Shannon. He creates the mathematical framework to understand information itself. He moves from Bell Labs to MIT in 1956. He becomes a living legend, but he hates the fame. He retreats into his house. He stops publishing papers. He starts building gadgets. But here is the hook. Here is the thing that makes you lean in. Shannon had a list. A list of his past passions. Things he was obsessed with. The list included things like chess, genealogy, and unicycles. But it also included this phrase: participation in the underworld. Shannon wasn't just a theorist. He was fascinated by the application of his math to the real world. He looked at the roulette wheel, he looked at the blackjack table, and he didn't see a game of chance. He saw a physics problem. He saw a system that was leaking information. If you can track the speed of the roulette ball, and the speed of the wheel, you can predict, not perfectly, but with an edge, where the ball will land. Just like John Payne used a mirror to get the horse race results seconds before the bookie. Shannon realized that if he could compute the physics of the roulette wheel fast enough, he could get the results seconds before the dealer called. No more bets. It's the same hustle. It's the exact same concept as the racing wire, but instead of using a telegraph and a mirror, Shannon was going to use the bit and the transistor. And that brings us to the convergence. The summary tells us about the invention of the transistor in 1947/1948. William Shockley shows it to Shannon. It's a tiny speck of germanium. It replaces the big, hot, fragile vacuum tubes. Shannon looks at this tiny device and he sees the future. He sees a world where his bits can be processed at lightning speeds by these transistors. He moves to MIT. He is surrounded by the smartest people on Earth. He is working on artificial intelligence before the term even really exists. He is thinking about machines that can learn. But in the background, the allure of the New Jersey underworld is pulling at him. The book sets the stage for a collision. You have the theoretical perfection of Shannon's mind, and you have the gritty, probabilistic reality of the casino floor. The first chunk of this book establishes the need for speed. The mob proved that if you have the info first, you win. The second chunk establishes the tool for speed. Claude Shannon proved that information can be tamed, measured, and processed mathematically. As we move forward in this book, we are going to see what happens when you take Shannon's brain and apply it to the mob's playground. We are going to see the birth of the Kelly criterion, a formula for betting that is so powerful, it scares economists. We are going to see how a couple of MIT scientists put on disguises and tried to beat the house in Las Vegas, not by cheating, but by outthinking the game. But we have to remember the foundation. It all started with a guy named John Payne with a mirror in Cincinnati, and a genius named Claude Shannon juggling balls in a hallway. It's a story about the transition of power. In the old days, power was muscle. It was violence. It was burn the stables. In the new world, Shannon's world, our world, power is logic. Power is code. Power is the ability to separate the signal from the noise faster than anyone else. The mob built the tracks. But the mathematicians built the engine. And as we wrap up this first deep dive, I want you to think about your own life. We are drowning in data. We are bombarded by tweets, emails, news alerts, stock tickers. It is a cacophony of noise. Claude Shannon taught us that within that noise, there is a signal. There is a truth. And if you can find it, and if you can act on it with the right formula, you don't just survive. You win. This is the story of how the world moved from the sure thing of a rigged race to the probabilistic edge of the algorithm. Next time, we're going to see what happens when the rubber hits the road, or rather, when the computer hits the casino. We'll meet the man who connected the dots, John Kelly. And we'll see why this fortune's formula is the most controversial equation in the history of finance. But for now, remember Frank Costello's hands. Remember Claude Shannon's unicycle. And remember, the house doesn't always win. Not if you know something they don't. Thanks for listening.